So let's talk about writing a philosophy paper. Why would you want to write a philosophy paper? Well, you might be in a class where one is assigned, or you might want to do one for some other reason, especially because philosophy papers typically involve explaining some complex view or explaining some kind of argument. And if you can do that with philosophy, which is pretty complicated, you can do that with anything, or it's good practice for anything, because being able to explain things and give arguments is a good skill in and of itself. So let's talk about how to do this better. I think what's key is being organized, getting an organization. And to get organized, you basically need to think about what are the various parts of my discussion? And so go to your computer, go to a real computer, and start making an outline. You can begin with this, I know I'm going to have an introduction. You should have an introduction. I know I'm going to have a conclusion. So put those into an outline format, and you're good to go. So what else are you going to do? Well, what's key is thinking in terms of parts or sections. So perhaps your first section, after your introduction, should be something like, explaining or stating the idea, stating the theory, stating the argument. In that section, you will just kind of explain the basics of whatever you're going to talk about. In the next section, you could have explaining the argument, explaining the idea. So the idea in the previous section, you kind of give a general idea. In the next section, you give sort of more details. So suppose in your first section, you give an argument. In your next section, you're going to explain that argument, explain each premise, explain the relationship between the premises, and so on and so forth. Next section, this is key, objections and questions. You're going to have many questions, objections, and you want to engage those. And then finally, you're back to your conclusion. Yeah, so basically, if you get your parts all out in order, you got your structure, then you're good to go. Introduction, stating the argument, explaining the argument, questions and objections, conclusion. If you have all those sections, you got a plan. So let me just say a little bit about the introduction. Your introduction can and should be pretty simple and short. Just say, I'm going to talk about this topic. I'm going to tell you this about this topic. My structure is going to proceed as follows, or something like that. Tell the person what you're going to argue if you're going to argue for something. If you can think of a clever way to begin with a hook, something that kind of can relate the topic to the ordinary person, how they see things, that would be great too. So I have a longer YouTube video on all this if you want to check it out, but here's the basics. I hope they're helpful.